Hi, this is Paul. Before I started making YouTubes, I blogged. And I blogged. Sometimes people go to my blog, and you can find a link to it below. I'll put a link there. There's not necessarily a whole lot interesting there. I used to do on my blog a lot of what I currently do with my YouTube channel. I had rough drafts for my sermons. I basically post links of any link I might want to come back to, a sermon illustration, an article I find interesting, just a link I want to randomly keep and get at. My blog is basically a public filing cabinet where I file and try out ideas and do a bunch of things like that. This morning I wrote a piece for my blog. This is my second draft at this sermon, not this sermon, at this video, because the first one failed. This morning I wrote a piece on my blog because my denomination is about to descend into the now familiar struggle over what to do with same-sex couples. I know there are people on both sides of this conversation in my audience. Some of you roll your eyes and say, why are you still talking about this? This is settled. It's settled in the United States. It's settled. Others of you roll your eyes and say, why are you still talking about this? This is settled. Well, I think actually once things are settled in some ways legally, that's a good time to talk about them because the stakes are lower. If you're currently a gay or lesbian, you have the legal right to marry in the United States. You have quite a few legal protections, and there are churches who would absolutely love to have you. But there are also churches that you would make uncomfortable and you would cause real issues. And so there's an issue coming up, as I mentioned before, in Neeland Avenue in Grand Rapids, Michigan, where they have ordained a woman who is currently married to another woman, and she served as a deacon before. And this is going to provoke a struggle in the Christian Reformed Church that may very well end the Christian Reformed Church as I have known it all my life, just by how these things work themselves out in terms of church polity. That's the rules by which churches organize themselves and conduct business. I could very well imagine that if there's a stalemate at the synodical level, that classes decide to bolt. Now, a classis in the Christian Reformed Church is a regional assembly. And whereas at many local churches, there's probably differences of opinion with respect to these. You'll find some local churches that are very conservative, and so almost nobody in the church would be in favor of either just letting Neeland do what they want or affirming. I don't think the Christian Reformed Church would have enough votes at a synod to go full-fledged either local option, allowing each individual congregation to do what they want, or become an affirming denomination. I doubt very much that would happen. But if Neeland and if Classis Grand Rapids East, which is the Classis of Neeland Avenue Church, if Classis Grand Rapids East doesn't discipline Neeland and tell them basically to cease and desist, and then Synod tells Grand Rapids East to discipline Neeland, and if they don't, then the Classis is out, well, that would be a devastating thing for the Christian Reformed Church, because Classis Grand Rapids East is where Calvin College is, the denominational building. Many denominational officials and college professors whose employment is tied to membership in the Christian Reformed Church, what happens to them and their employment when suddenly they are no longer members of the Christian Reformed Church because of events in Neeland Avenue? This is a big deal. And so, in many ways, my interest in this is I want the Christian Reformed Church to have a productive conversation about these issues, and not just the issues directly surrounding same-sex marriage, but the far deeper issues that I like to talk about on my channel. Now, there was some people will say, does this matter? There's a blog, the Post Calvin, which has, like, if you're 31 and under, I don't know why that is. My niece is an editor of this blog. So if you're 31 and under and you're an alumnus of Calvin College, you get a chance to write here. And same-sex marriage debate is in many ways tied up with many other debates that have played a big role in the deconstruction movement, in the people no longer identifying as Christian or no longer going to church or something like this. And just last week, there was a very interesting article on Post-Calvin by Katie Van Zanen. Notice the Dutch last name. Calvin College is still half of a graduating class is full of Dutchies, but she gets into this matrix of politics and culture war. I don't remember the details of the conversation. I wish I did. I've turned it over and over in my mind, but it's in a genre folks raised in Christian communities will recognize. The faith and works debate. In my case, it was a conversation about elderly congregants in a rural Midwestern church and about faithlessness. One person said something like, "But they know their Bible so well, they're prayer warriors." The other asks, "Does it matter? Does it matter that they've memorized the Heidelberg Catechism?" That's an important document in the Christian Reformed Church. That they can recite all 150 Psalms, that they spend hours in silence in front of an open Bible every morning if they're trying to prevent a refugee family from settling in their community. Right there, for many people who are... And this article was beautifully written, and I thought so powerfully represented the voice of the deconstructing. And so you have this matrix of religion and politics, and people are always looking at the other matrix of religion and politics on the other side, but both sides have it. If they keep telling everyone Barack Obama is a Kenyan Muslim, if they cut a gay grandchild out of their will, or if in 2020 they're spreading vicious and nonsensical QAnon theories on Facebook defending the guy who murdered 2 people who were protesting the police shooting of Jacob Blake. I don't even know who Jacob Blake is. Good thing she has a link. If they agree with the president that we should let democratic cities rot, does their commitment to daily devotions matter then? I am really angry every single day. When I'm on a Zoom call with my parents, it's like I can't help myself from saying ugly and bitter things about the American church, Christian institutions, and all the people I associate with power in these places. I can hear myself as I say these things, and there is a part of me in that moment that feels so sad and heartbroken. I am so angry. I am really, really angry. What's striking about this is that this person, now I'm reading a ton into this, which may or may not be true. This person is likely a product of an educational system that has been wrought and maintained by the Christian Reformed Church at great expense over decades to attempt to produce children in line with their community. And what has happened is that these outside forces have in some ways simply overwhelmed the walls. The Christian Reformed Church was practicing the Benedict doctrine long before Roger came up with the idea. But these issues have sort of swamped and overwhelmed this, and so here you obviously have a bright, young, articulate, this woman should probably be a poster child for the product of these Christian Reformed institutions, and this is what she's saying. Well, this is a very big deal. There's a part of me that wanted to write a post entitled, "For the love of God, don't vote for this asshole." There's a part of me who wanted to reason with some imagined audience of acquaintances about why being against abortion is not good enough reason to vote for an authoritarian fearmonger whose policies will only make abortion more common. And there is part of me that wanted to tell how appointing a Supreme Court justice to repeal Roe v. Wade will subject women who experience miscarriage to criminal suspicion, which is clearly abhorrent and should be. And there's a part of me that wanted to loudly declare how eternally done I am listening to men talk about abortion. I just did. But I was reading. There's a part of me that wanted to carefully outline the Republican Party's decades-long and explicit plan to suppress the vote and undermine the legitimacy of our elections. There's a part of me that wanted to write 1,000 posts to respond to every possible talking point, every reason someone could go for voting for a serial liar who brags about assaulting women, and 1,000 follow-up posts responding to every critique they could log about the ways in which I said this is unconscionable to support him. There's a part of me that wanted to write a post like this one, where I burn it to the ground, where I say definitely, block me if you support any part of this bullshit, even reluctantly, because there's no justification you can give that will make it okay. There's a part of me that wants to beg, please don't do this. Please don't destroy what's remaining of my faith that I have in you. A Christian writer I follow on Twitter who has been protesting police brutality in Portland, where, again, I do not forget the federal agents have kidnapped protesters in unmarked vans and police have allowed... You get the idea, and I'll put the link below and you can read it again. But you get the sense that, well, this doesn't matter. Well, it surely matters to her. And if you've been around long enough, you have the sense of deconstruction, and I can't tolerate this church anymore. But I want a church that reflects what I think. And everyone does. It's the right and the left. That's part of the function of the consumer church. But it's also the case that there are other issues that are very much in play. Many of the points that she makes are simply the points that come up again and again from the culture war, abortion, Trump, so on and so forth. I think it's helpful to remember that either a year from now or 5 years from now, Donald Trump will not be president. That's a really helpful thing, and that's something that age helps you realize. Now, again, all of you will have ideas about whether that's a good or bad thing and the damage done by the Republicans or by the Democrats, on and on and on, but a little bit of perspective is in order. One of the other very common things to come up in the Twitterverse and in the news is the question of high-status Christian men and their moral failure. And so in thinking about all the things that I think about, and thinking about the culture war and the Christian Reformed Church's impending, very sad fight over same-sex marriage, about, the political situation, about all of these things, this morning I blogged, and I spent about an hour blogging and writing this thing, and then afterwards I thought I'm going to want to talk about this because, there's, maybe a few hundred people that follow my blog, and I posted it on some of my social media links, so at this point, let's see, I can see... At this point, some, less than 200 people have read my post, which actually isn't bad for a post that I do. But I wanted to sort of bring all these things together and look at them in order to sort of figure out, well, what can we learn? Because, okay, you're going to have a chance, if you're an American citizen, to vote for or against Donald Trump, and that's really what this election is coming down to. If you are a member of a church, you're probably going to have a chance to vote for or against staying in your denomination or leaving your denomination or affirming or not affirming. You're going to have a chance to post whatever you want on Facebook or Twitter. You're going to have a chance to talk to your friends, yada, yada, yada. All of us have just a little bit of influence. And all of us have to decide what to do with our own lives. But Ravi Zacharias was a Christian apologist, very high status. Oh, great. Now the link is dead. Hang on. This link I picked up in an online forum for pastors, and I thought it was really a fine article. It goes into the question of Ravi Zacharias and the allegations of sexual impropriety with respect to him. And Julie Roys, you can find her on Twitter. She's a journalist who kind of polices high celebrity conservative Christian men and their sexual behavior and follows the news stories on them. And of course, the Ravi Zacharias debate is a little less clean cut than a lot of debates, and so some people will go through it. But I thought this article was really quite good. Sadly, we're here again. Another prominent male Christian leader abusing his power and squandering their reputation through their sexual behavior. The Roy's report, and there's a link there, and I'll put the link to this in the notes below, released devastating news last week that Ravi Zacharias, the famous apologist who died on May 19, 2020, befriended, groomed, and then initiated sexting relationship with a married woman, Lori-Ann Thompson. Then when Thompson told Zacharias she was going to tell her husband about the illicit relationship, emails showed Zacharias threatened suicide. Months later, after Thompson and Zacharias had signed a non-disclosure agreement confining them to silence, Zacharias publicly released a statement to Christianity Today, painting Thompson as a predator. Although these qualified allegations are heartbreaking, they've become devastatingly familiar. For that reason, I want to address two themes from the latest scandal that are important for us to explore, particularly for men. The first is sexual binge purge cycle in the sexual lives of evangelical men. The second is a call for men to do their own work to outgrow problematic and abusive sexual behaviors. The presence of all of this therapeutic language is really interesting. I name both of these as an evangelical male who has also had to confront these issues within my own life. As a mental health therapist with over a decade of experience and research of over 2,000 men struggling with compulsive sexual behavior, the latest scandal provides us with yet another front row seat into the bulimic sexuality structure characteristic of many faith leaders and their followers. Bulimia occurs when someone indulges in a particular substance or behavior only to purge out through excessive exercising or vomiting. Sexual bulimia, a metaphor of course, is an agonizing struggle where someone engulfs themselves in a particular sexual behavior, then does everything they can to purge themselves of the sin and shame of what they've been indulging. An example of sexual bulimia might be a pastor who is dealing with a number of crises in his church during the week, has fallen behind on his sermon, and then stays up binging on pornography Saturday night. He wakes up Sunday morning praying for God's mercy to be new in the morning and pleads with the Spirit to help him get through the service. Then his sermon might go one of three ways. Number one, he will never talk about unwanted sexual behavior for fear he might indict himself, denial. Number two, he will preach about the ugliness of sin, the horrors of sexual immorality, and begin to scapegoat others for their sexual behavior, projection. Three, he will begin to preach passionately, maybe even cry about the goodness of the gospel for sinners, the gospel purge. And you can see him binge on pornography or an affair, buying sex, sexting, etc., setting this need to purge out his behavior through his prayer, avoidance, or preaching. While I have no problem with the leader finding passion and tears about the goodness of God, it's unhealthy when he does not see how his purge is connected to his binge from the night or the week or the month before. Remember Jimmy Swaggart? A lot of you don't remember Jimmy Swaggart. I'm showing my age, but just Google Jimmy, just YouTube Jimmy Swaggart's prayerful confession about the affair he had. I mean, you don't have to look far for these stories, and you can find them pretty much across denominational lines, but not just with pastors. You'll find them with politicians. But I think this therapist is correct in noting there are some peculiar structures with Christians with respect to this. Ravi's sexting binge and apologetic purge. In the case of Ravi Zacharias, we see a leader who was binging with his sexual and emotional life with a woman 30 years younger than him. When she eventually calls him on his behavior, he threatens her with his suicide. It's not an uncommon thing. She ends up entering into a non-disclosure agreement, and Zacharias uses this to tell the public in 2017 that a woman was trying to extort him when she sent him the sext. And you can see Zacharias is a widely manipulative man. There's a little bit of an overreach. Let's talk about his behavior. Characterizations. That's a pretty big characterization. Every good apologist knows the art of manipulating, from the Latin word manus, meaning using the hand to influence an outcome. Perhaps every pastor is manipulative then, including myself, because if you're a pastor and you're at all effective, you understand how to use pathos in communicating a message. Then what do we do? Then what do we see in his public life? He's known as the greatest Christian apologist of the century. One of Zacharias' greatest talents was to influence and persuade others. Tragically, he did not seem to address the shadow side of his talent in his sexual life. I find this to be a compelling blog post. Should we call the author wildly manipulative? Because pretty much any persuasive argument could be charged as being manipulative. Anyway, a call for men to outgrow. That's an interesting word. Overcome, perhaps? Outgrow? Again, a lot of these progressive-ish metaphors lead us to believe that there's an arc of personal growth and that somehow this is natural because the toddler grows into a man unbiding. We often will tell people to grow up. So, mature. Anyway, a call to men to outgrow unwanted sexual behaviors. The sexual problems we face as men are opportunities to grow. I think that's true. They also are the very behaviors that block women from leadership roles. Bill Hybels. And this is where the article starts to fall apart. Because there have been many high-profile pastors who have been very supportive of women in leadership roles. One of the points, in all fairness to Donald Trump, not my favorite president, and I'll get tagged on that, but we're all entitled to our politics. One of the things that Donald Trump, I remember watching him on The Apprentice, and for all of Donald Trump's, well-known and documented behavior with women who have been or weren't his wife, he has tended to like to hire women. And there have been women in very high power positions around him. He did that with his cabinet. Donald Trump likes hiring women. Now, I think sometimes he likes hiring good-looking women, but when it comes to high-status men, I don't find that unusual. I've known a fair number of high-status, high-wealth men, and they tend to like to surround themselves with beauty, let's say. And sometimes that beauty comes in the form of a woman. And study after study will demonstrate that good-looking, attractive, well-socialized men and women do better at school, do better in the job market. They have a degree of privilege that is used. You just have to watch TV and look how shockingly beautiful everyone is on TV, even and sometimes especially in news programming, to say, this is not something that just Christians have to deal with. This is something that is pretty common to all of us. We have biases, and we are always biased towards people who look youthful and attractive. And so this is kind of a, when I read that line, it's sort of, well, now we're pouring a little bit more into this as such. And while I think there is some validity to the idea that sometimes men who struggle with these things doth protest too much, it's not at all uncommon to find the pastor that is out there on a crusade to keep women out of certain things and keep gays out of certain things are sometimes struggling with their own issues. I think the point he makes on that is absolutely appropriate. But to sort of segment this to one side, no. No, I think it's much more universal. While some of the men who have their own issues maybe get a little louder about it, I don't find this Kevin Spacey, shall we name him? Bill Clinton, Donald Trump, JFK. Which president in the latter 20th century didn't have an affair? George Bush, Jimmy Carter, and at least not that we know of, but, for the most part, it seemed like George Bush, at least by the time that I got to know him, not personally, but in the presidency, seemed, he and Laura, for the most part, seemed to kind of have their act together and like their marriage. Jimmy Carter, the same way. Barack Obama, in many ways, was sort of the irony of ironies, beloved by the, let's call it the, not really libertarian, but the liberationist side of the country, embodies a tremendously Puritan archetype of a man deeply faithful to his wife, and deeply faithful to his daughters, and by all accounts wonderful to them, which ironically makes him deeply attracted to a lot of women that, could potentially set up a scenario in which that whole thing would come crashing down. And this is something that, as pastors and church leaders, not terribly unfamiliar with. Women are attracted to men who are faithful to their wives, and that attraction might lead to a scenario by which they would be unfaithful to their wives, thus destroying the image of this high status male's power and status. And so that drove me to write my own blog piece. And this article was posted on a CRC online forum, and I thought it was excellent. I did think it was an excellent article. Someone commented that the CRC Safe Church office is going to have the author in for some other shindig thing because they loved it so much. Fair enough. If Jay Stringer wants to come on my channel and defend some of the elements of his article that I critique, love to have you, Jay. I don't know if you're on Twitter. If I might link you into this, and we'll see if you want to come on. I think having conversations where there's a degree of disagreement are the most interesting conversations there are, especially if we can have them profitably. And just reading Jay Stringer's article makes me think that's a possibility. Anyway, back to my post. The regularity and predictability of high-status church men, capital MEN, behaving badly sexually creates an interesting game in our culture war. It's like a sailboat in a windstorm. All the aspects of the individual play into the chaotic maelstrom of our collective misery. And that's so true. It's why things sort of keep blowing up out of control with all of the wind going back and forth. Any little thing that can catch the wind is sure to, and you're about to get an incident that gets public and becomes fodder for throwing at the other side. I think Jonathan Haidt so nicely talked about the fact that part of what happens on social media is we just wait and wait for a bit of hypocrisy on the other side to be exposed so that we can take it to social media. And I've certainly been guilty of this myself, but it's a bad habit I should break. The argument for same-sex marriage for most people revolves around the current imaginary with regard to the natural. And again, the questions of the natural are deeply embedded in many of the other things I discuss in my videos with respect to deism. And the natural sort of has a position of moral privilege right now because, well, we oughtn't to buck the natural. The natural is good and goes along with it, but of course the nature is red in tooth and claw. And we sort of have this newfound warmth towards the natural because we've colonized and conquered it so thoroughly that now suddenly when we discover that we're filling our bodies with all sorts of unnatural things and that there are consequences to all these tools that we've used to manage and put nature on a leash, now suddenly we want to go back to nature, but only a little bit. I don't think anybody wants to go back to plagues and lower life expectancy. Nature on a leash. Which movie was that? I don't recall. Great line. Anyway, back to the article. I knew I'd do this if I read my article. Lots of commentary, even on my own comments. For whatever combination of nature and nurture you want to postulate, there's a degree of moral permission around sexual expression and gratification that feels authentic to them, with a few notable remaining exceptions. So that's part of I think the overwhelmingly convincing argument for many people about same-sex marriage is that they're born that way, although born that way is suffering a brutal beating at the hands of later alphabet letters and LGBTQI, et cetera, because basically the whole gender identity posture is I get a chance to express what I express. And California just, Gavin Newsom just signed into law that, well, you can go into the jail of your gender identity as long as it won't be a threat to you and to others. Well, I think there'll be a fair amount of those cases landing in court because if you're a smallish male going into prison with maybe some aspects you're concerned of, a quick change in gender identity might land you in a very different place. I don't know if I'd rather be in a men's prison or a women's prison. I'd like to not be in any prison. But anyway, so born that way and it's natural and what other choice they have. I mean, these are compelling points. And I don't want to dismiss these points because, again, I see in friends of mine and people I love that, yes, they're married, they're gay, and I would in many ways rather have them if they're going to live this way and they can't find themselves imagining themselves living any other way, to do so within the confines of some kind of agreement or covenant like marriage, by which other longer-term fruits can emerge in the relationship, the likes of which heterosexuals have had to navigate for a very long time. And so this puts me sort of right in the middle. I see the strong arguments by both sides, and people complain in my series on same-sex marriage that, well, you're not telling us what you think. No, I am exactly telling you what I think. Now, what you want to know is how I would vote in such and such a thing, but you want to know that hypothetically, and I'd say, well, I'll vote on such and such a thing when I am sitting in the room and have to vote on such and such a thing. And what I usually wind up doing is making noises about this issue that annoys both sides. But I actually think that's part of what needs to be done as we continue to work through these issues together, and not just quickly grab a position and go off into the future, but maybe actually use all this gray matter we have and the opportunity to speak with one another to maybe learn something along the way. The current lament and agenda is that Christianity has since late antiquity forced individuals into binding social situations that take from them the joy of fulfillment that would be theirs if they had been able to pursue their bliss. And so read From Shame to Sin, and about how in late antiquity Christians sort of won the day. And the popular imaginary, well, there's a lot of debate as to what degree this thing really won the day, but increasingly it became assumed that same-sex behavior was immoral, or at least out of step with Christianity. And you had sanctions and people going into the closet, et cetera, and sort of the contemporary subtraction narrative is, especially by atheist skeptics, is that, oh, see what religion does? It persecuted gays, and fair enough. And in many ways, I'm a product of the time that I'm living in now, and for my gay friends and relatives, I'm glad that nobody's hunting them down or keeping them from jobs or imagining that they are necessarily a threat to children. All of that seems unfounded and unfair, and so I think many Christians today, even though reluctantly seeing what society had progressed towards, have not basically necessarily lamented all of what's changed. But the narrative is that Christianity is to blame for a lot of this cruel history because, well, didn't the Greeks and the Romans, they didn't think it was that big of a deal. Yeah, but read Tom Holland and actually do some reading about what the Greeks and the Romans were like on many of these things. And it's hardly the rather low-resolution utopia that people imagine that somehow liberation will bring. And it's for that reason that we should talk through these issues carefully and think about them carefully and pay attention to this live action experiment that we're all undergoing and participating in right now. The emphasis has been on social stigmas, such as homophobia, that has punished or repressed an individual's natural, again, there's that word again, expression and restricted them from pursuing their bliss. This has followed a previous wave where historical events, even individual choice missteps, someone, let's say, by virtue of the symbolic, dramatic, liturgical, imaginary, repressed their sexual inclinations and their same-sex attraction, and then married someone of the opposite sex only within time to have this revealed to have been a disastrous choice, and both people are unhappy. And again, I have no personal stories up close of this kind of thing, and it's just painful and disastrous. And so, yeah, fair enough. These stories are compelling, but don't talk about Rosaria Butterfield, because stories go the other way, and that's the thing with stories. They often do go the other way. So this has followed a previous wave where historical events, even individual choice missteps, have locked some persons into an unfortunate or unwise pairing. Only later do they realize that they have missed out on a better arrangement, which could have been the upgrade compared to one that they now looked upon. So we're, on some ways, we're sort of looking at Brokeback Mountain and Bridges of Madison County, because For every one sad story of someone who had significant same-sex attraction, married a woman by virtue of their Christian commitment or community standards, yada, 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 only to have that relationship end unhappily for both parties, there are 5 to 10 or even more situations where someone married someone and later went on to regret at some point who they married and had children and property and a messy divorce and. So, yeah, on one hand, we can very much pay attention to how this plays out in the same-sex situation, but the vast majority of people, it's played out in the heterosexual situation. Don't forget, we're talking about policing the sex lives of high-status Christian men, and we'll get back to that. We're talking about the current lament and agenda, why Christianity should be undone and overthrown because this is what it's participated in. Religious people have in many ways taken center stage in such dramas because of the religio, from the Latin, which is binding. It classically prompts people to commit themselves to costly arrangements such as marriage, often at the prompting of some supernatural power, again, that's a new word, not an old word, some divine authority, or perhaps parental or societal pressure if it's an arranged marriage, prompted by some supernatural power who demands sacrifice, and in this case, the sacrifice of one's freedom to pursue fulfillment, happiness, joy, or whatever narrative one might imagine to produce the bliss we feel ourselves. Typos. I should fix that typo. Hang on. Maybe I'll keep the editing window up. There will be more typos. Our current cultural moral imagination is a combination of Gnosticism. See, there's a typo, and I can fix that right away. And scientism. Should probably put a capital S on that one too. Our current cultural moral imagination is a combination of Gnosticism and scientism, the secret sacred self, and science. Science will tell us that high-status mammalian males are biologically driven to colonize history with their superior genetic material. Donald Trump. Donald Trump is a classic high-status mammal male, and his behavior is very biologically predictable, as are many, many high-status men. And again, now I'm only naming famous people because they're famous and you'd recognize the name. I've known many in much smaller hierarchies to exhibit this status, and in fact, that's, again, almost always part of the conversation. Females watch men compete and select the winners to mate with. They don't necessarily have to be good-looking. Donald Trump, getting up there in years. I'll let you ladies decide how attractive Donald Trump is, whether it's his physique or his physicality or his hair, or whether it's his status and his personality and his money. You can decide for yourself. But it doesn't hurt. Just Google Brad Pitt's string of relationship. Look at Howard Hughes. I mean, just again and again and again. No evolutionary biologist is surprised at the behavior of high-status men. Genghis Khan. This is normal stuff. This is normal, natural behavior for high-status males, heterosexual males especially. You can watch it in the animal kingdom. You can see it clearly throughout history. Powerful men have had access to beautiful women, and the higher the status, the more they've got. Read the book of Esther. Look at King David, King Solomon. Christianity has not only been anti-gay in this narrative, but anti-high-status male. We have a new set of victims, high-status men. The Apostle Paul tells Christian men of the Roman Empire to love their wives and lay down their lives for their wives as Christ does for his church. That's not in the evolutionary biological playbook for high-status males. High-status males should go out and multiply their seed. Just read a really interesting biography of Darwin. Fascinating. Anyway, the Apostle Paul tells Christian men in the Roman Empire to love their wives, not a given. Tells other men not to frequent prostitutes, book of 1 Corinthians, which is sort of a poor man's polygamy. Well, maybe you can't buy her, but you can rent her. Rent a partner instead of paying the expensive access and legal heirs. Our culture has enough Christianity in it that we applaud the marital arrangements of Barack Obama over and against Donald Trump. And this is where I've just watched the two political sides with so much irony, because here you have the nearly puritanical Barack Obama leading tribe liberation, and Donald Trump leading tribe authoritarian as a man's man. But this, I would suggest, is likely on increasing. Oh, I should read the whole paragraph. Our culture has enough Christianity that we applaud the marital arrangements of Barack Obama over against Donald Trump. But this, I would suggest, is likely on increasingly thin ice in the unending tug of war between the interests of men and the interests of women. Men and women want exclusive access to one another. We all want what we want. Ask Woody Allen. Men and women want exclusive access to one another because it is in their own interest. Men don't want other men implanting their seed in their women. Women don't want competition for the man's resources from the offspring of other women. Read Cinderella. Why is and this is, again, so much Jordan Peterson stuff in this, and you can find all sorts of Jordan Peterson stuff in this. Why is it the evil stepmother? Why does the stepmother begrudge the children of another woman? Now, again, not always. Some people I know have had wonderful step-parents, and that's terrific. But an evolutionary biologist will say, well, but it is not a level playing field because, well, the women are seeking the women are seeking the promotion of their own genetic material, and the men are seeking the promotion of their own genetic material. And so, while there might be other factors, and again, the reality of just how many other factors and how powerful they are, whether these are biological, genetic, or societal, is a deep part, and actually what this blog post is about, which we'll get to in a little bit. In some ways, the truce is monogamy. And if that can't be gained, then minimized serial polygamy, which is basically what we have in America right now. That is the community standard for moral sexual relationships. Don't cheat. Well, what is cheating? Cheating is having sex with someone else when you're not telling your partner. So polys would say, well, it's okay as long as you're all being up board. So you've got consent and basically letting your partner know if you're having sex with other people, or even want to have sex with other people, or attracted to other people, because again, these demands for exclusivity, they run deep. Our technological democratic age rushes in to offer affordable compromises to both sides. Women get cheap and effective birth control and abortion to afford more choice in terms of attracting and selecting a male that might be the best choice for that male, for that provider male, who will be exclusively committed with his resources to her offspring. Okay, so that's the very well articulated game that is at play, at least one level of the game. But with great power comes great responsibility. She'd better be careful with this strategy because it's a waiting game. And there are also now societal pressures to seek her own security by waiting, getting a career, get out there and make some money. Many women in previous generations have said, I banked on the man being faithful to me and he wasn't. And now, and hence you have divorce settlements where men have to pay alimony. Again, the legal system was trying to compensate for all of the normal things that were going on in the society. Many want to construct their own path to security by pursuing education and a career, and also status. Again, there's lots of layers and lots of levels, and here's the thing about human being. It's game upon game upon game upon game upon game. There's many, 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 many things going on at the same time. But we quite naturally manage these affairs, and we do it mostly intuitively and subconsciously, but that's sort of what's going on beneath the surface. And we're going to get into two-level theories a little bit. Many want to construct their own path to security by pursuing education and career so as to not be dependent upon a man for finances, but at the expense of their peak fertility and sexual attractiveness. Just go ahead and check out OkCupid's little video on, I think it was The Atlantic, where they said, well, everybody's a little bit racist. Yeah, and men are more than a little bit sexist when it comes to sexual partners. All the men on OkCupid were looking at the 21-year-olds. And the women, for the most part, were looking at men at about their own age. Well, why? Well, men and women are, for the most part, again, it's huge variety. for the most part, looking at different things and looking for different things. And again, this is no mystery. Can we just have an adult conversation about it and be honest? Not that every person succumbs to these forces, but these forces do not make the field level. These forces work like a current in an ocean body where you go out into the water and you're just kind of slowly going down the beach. I've told that illustration before. Many women are not navigating this well and finding themselves in their mid-30s with financial assets, but reduced capacity in the attractiveness and in the attracting a man market, because all the men, they're looking at men that are 3 to 5 years older than them, and all those men are looking at women who are 10 to 15 years younger than they are. And hence, having to produce seed to fertilize their own eggs. Biology, or God, has unfairly afforded men an advantage when it comes to time. Men have no comparable biological clock, Tony Randall. They too can use tools of contraception to enjoy the milk without having to purchase the cow. I could get in trouble for that. High status males in the dating market are doing very well in terms of gaining sexual access to a disproportionate number of women in the market. By our own admission, in this age of two-track narratives where the real reasons are beneath the conscious level, women are in some ways auditioning the men as fathers for their offspring, while the men are happy to oblige without the risk of being tied down. They no longer have the privilege nor the expense of paying child support. Many can play this game until at some point, if they want to settle down and have a family with a woman of their choice. But again, for the men have all the cards in this, or at least many of the cards. Take a look at Jerry Seinfeld. I mean, I like watching Jerry Seinfeld in cars with coffee. I don't drink coffee, but I like the cars and I like the conversation. I like Jerry Seinfeld. And of course, Jerry Seinfeld is a wonderful illustration because, of course, our image of Jerry Seinfeld is sort of meshed up with the show Seinfeld. And of course, Jerry always had some really attractive girlfriend, and one wonders, how much dating and fornicating Jerry Seinfeld did before he finally settled down. And I did a little Wikipedia snooping to discover that, surprise, surprise, Jerry Seinfeld's wife is 15 years younger than he is. That should not come as any surprise to an evolutionary biologist. Jerry Seinfeld might be a good example of that. Playing the field through one's 20s or 30s, and if so inclined, find a younger woman of childbearing age and then have a child in your 40s and 50s. That's the script. Or if you don't. Just keep having one girlfriend after another. I mean, for right now, generally speaking, for men, not in church, because it's so funny because people will have problems with the church saying something about your live-in boyfriend, but if some guy looks like Brad Pitt and maybe has a high sexual appetite and is bedding every woman in the singles group, at some point these women are going to compare notes and they're going to go to the pastor and say, you've got to do something about this man. Well, why? Well, you want me to shut up about these people over here, but you want me to use my positional and religious authority to curb this behavior? This behavior is natural. This behavior is God-given. This behavior is what we would fully expect from a good-looking, intelligent male who has figured out a way to earn money and has a nice car and has a good job. And that's why all of you agreed to sleep with him. And now you want to play the fornication card? In fact, women, ladies, if maybe you played some of these other cards differently, things might go in a different way. Right now, sort of the status is, well, consent, and one at a time. There's a great piece in the New York Times in 2018. He asked permission to touch, but not to ghost. And it's a haunting piece where, this young man, well, on our first date, he took an Uber to my apartment through the winter storm. As the snow fell outside, we sat close on my couch. While he talked touchingly about poetry, it's a high-status man who knows his game. He knows how to woo a woman like this. 2 hours in, I was hoping you would kiss me, and he did. He was a sweet kisser. For an hour we sat with his hand cupped behind my ear, kissing and talking. We had met on Tinder. I was nearly 30 and he was 24. This is a high-status woman. She can attract a 24-year-old. She's probably very good looking. And the 20, there's, look at the psychology in terms of that too. It's interesting stuff, although people don't like looking at it because, again, it's all these things under the surface that we don't like to admit are happening. Other things we like to point out are happening in other people, but not me. Not me. I'm the exception. We had met on Tinder. I was nearly 30 and he was 24, but our age gap somehow seemed a lot larger than 5 years. That's because he's younger. Not because he acted especially young. It was more that when it came to sex and foreplay, he acted so differently from guys my age. He's been indoctrinated. He's been taught. He's had his university Title IX lecture, asking for my consent about nearly everything. Is it okay if we go to the bedroom, he said. I smiled and led him there. He tugged at the hem of my sweater and I said, said, is it okay to take this off? I don't want this video to get too risque. I nodded and blah, 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 blah. I'll put the link in and you can, if I forget to put the link in, mention in the comment section, or you can just Google, he asked permission to touch but not to ghost. Anyway, on and on and on, and they get hot and heavy. And then she starts talking about how she feels afterwards. At the end of the night, he said, see you soon, and took an Uber back to his apartment through the snow. Afterwards, I sat on my bed thinking about the encounter. I knew I had been a little dismissive of all the asking, but in fact, I had liked it as a form of caretaking. I wasn't used to being taken care of in that way. Sex makes me feel unsafe. Boy, talk to that one with your therapist. Talk to that one with the evolutionary biologist. Talk to that one with your pastor. Oh, you don't go to church. Come on, you don't go to church. You go every now and then, and it's a certain kind of church, I know, but because of the act itself, not because of the act itself, but because my partner so often disappeared afterwards. Our partner are men. Whether I waited hours or months before the first time, it didn't matter how long she kind of, suddenly this whole game from the 1950s of until the ring, Paradise by the Dashboard Light, Meatloaf, will you love me forever? Do you need me? Will you never leave me? Will you make me so happy for the rest of my life? Will you make me my wife? Will you make me your wife? Paradise by the Dashboard Light, Meatloaf. So it's after sex when I feel truly vulnerable. Yet something else about his asking made me feel uneasy. It seemed legalistic and self-protective. Yeah, he's worrying about himself here. Imported more from the courtroom than from a true sense of caretaking. And each time he asked, it was as if he assumed I lacked the agency to say no on my own. Yeah, there's something to that Title IX business about that. There is an infantilizing aspect to all of this safe spacing. As if he expected me to say no, not believing that a woman would have the desires to keep saying yes. Still, I liked that he was trying to keep from hurting me unawares. He texted that night reassuringly. I decided I would call his asking lovely. I decided I would try to learn. The next time he was in the bedroom, he paused with his hand at the zipper of my dress. Is this okay? He said. Ba 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 ba. I'll skip some of the more salacious part. Given our wholly consensual interaction, did it matter who was stronger? Couldn't we treat each other as two equal human beings, each of whom had invited or agreed to intimate acts? Wasn't that the beautiful thing he was teaching me, that he could be fully human to each other, checking in, honoring yes and no? If I could go back in time, I would have urged him in that moment to really think about why asking for consent even matters. Because the answer, I think, is basic. We want people we're intimate with to feel good, not bad. Okay, but feel good for how long? While he was waiting for his Uber to arrive, he said he would cook me dinner next time. Steak with sauteed mushrooms and fig balsamic reduction. Wow. I mostly make scrambled eggs, I said. He laughed, kissed me, and said, see you soon. I did not see him soon. I texted him a few times that day, followed playfully at first, then more pressing. He ignored me. At first, I couldn't believe he didn't answer, and then I was devastated. Did he find somebody else? Is he uninterested? Did I say something? Did my breath smell? Has he gone on to someone? He's 24, maybe it's a 23-year-old. Does she have certain color hair? Does her body have certain aspects? Yada, yada, yada. This is how we think, isn't it? My roommates didn't understand why I was so much hurt, more hurt than usual. Oh, you've been through this before? Because he kissed the soft part of my arm, he said, and then he disappeared. It's not the vagina. It's not the erogenous zones. It's the intimacy. It's the relational. They looked at me blankly because he asked for my consent over and over, so sex felt like a sacred act. And then he disappeared. A sacred act? One roommate said laughingly. Girl, you sure don't treat it like one. But I do, she argues. We perform sacred acts for and with and among strangers all the time. Give charitably to people we don't know. We pray in churches with people we don't know. Okay. But you've got a pretty low resolution of the environment of the sacred. Back to my piece. Jerry Seinfeld. The women he's been with, how many women do you imagine Jerry Seinfeld had sex with before he settled down? High status male, on TV. I'll let you ladies decide how good looking it is. He was quirky, funny. Women love a sense of humor. Maybe he didn't want to marry. Maybe he got to have sex with a famous figure, but don't have access to his near $1 billion net worth. Lower status men increasingly have virtual access to highly attractive women through pornography or prostitution if they have enough money. Democracy and technology go hand in hand. Enter the high status conservative Christian male. Remember what this is about? This poor victim has all the biological natural compulsion to spread his seed and all the religious pressure not to do so. Talk about cross-pressured. This sets up for them a real gotcha. Their status is dependent upon fulfilling a rather anti-biological sexual script of self-denial. If they betray that script, they lose their status and also the opportunity for fulfilling their biological drive. If they keep to the script, they lose out on what their biology wants for them. How do they compensate? Well, that's where the article comes in. How do they compensate? Spiritual bulimia. I think he's dead on right with that. Wow, what an observation. Really helpful. But why only high status, usually celebrity, but hey, ministers, they might not have the type of display on the Serengeti mating opportunities of Jerry Seinfeld or Bill Hybels or Ravi Zacharias or Furtick or Joel Osteen or. But local church, compassionate man, good social skills, faithful to his wife in public. There's a lot of pitfalls for pastors. How do they compensate? There needs to be other goods above and beyond what sexual biology is offering. There's a lot of things involved in this economy. Now, these trade-offs are, of course, not unique. There are trade-offs all over the place in life. Monogamy is a system of trade-offs. Till death do us part is a trade-off where lots of other goods come in and compensate for the sacrifices inherent in the relationship. Men and women both get exclusive access, which both like. Children get exclusive access to resources, which both like, which all parties like, which is good for everyone. It's monogamy, broadly constructed in a society, works pretty well. And, just look for a competing situation that outperforms it. I don't think you have one. But, of course, our technological supremacy over nature has afforded us longer lives, which makes monogamy a little bit difficult. Now we know more than just 200 or 300 people that we're with, and now a high-status person, you're a rock star. Women will want to go to bed with you. You get to have sex, they get to have a story. Reasonable exchange, right? Watch out for the STDs. Magic Johnson. Monogamy has plenty of trade-offs, also sacrifices. Now, obviously, the dynamic for same-sex attracted people are different, and they are. Right away, it is clear that biological reproduction isn't at play in the same way as it is with primarily opposite attracted persons. Contraception has, of course, changed this equation, and I really don't think we would be having the conversation about same-sex marriage if contraception hadn't radically changed the sexual economy for heterosexual people. I don't think we pay near enough attention to that. Maybe the Roman Catholics are. I think they've had a leg up in this conversation for a while. Yes, Mary. Yes, Mary. I read your comments. You make strong points. Are you manipulative like a pastor, Mary? I've met such wonderful people on YouTube. Contraception has, of course, changed the equation through making heterosexual behavior increasingly fruitless, like sterile homosexual behavior. It gets enormously complex, of course, because the desire to procreate is there in same-sex attracted people too, but it isn't a natural outcome of their sexual desire. And so you have surrogacy and adoption and insemination and in order to try to sort of fill out the cards of many of the desires that we have to parent and to procreate and to all of those kinds of things. If you follow the logic, you can see how, let's say, the math is different. And it is, and that's a point that people don't like to bring up in this debate. But here's the rub. The moral of the economy of the two systems are joined. The low-resolution takeaway from both the high-profile Christian moral failures and the common demand to remove religious and societal barriers to natural sexual fulfillments find each other. Traditional Christianity is seen as unnatural and therefore untrue. It says that same-sex attracted individuals should not seek what's natural to them. And when high-status Christian men fail to keep to the script, someone comes along and says, see, it doesn't even work for the promoters of their worldview. That's a devastating point. That's why when Jerry Falwell Jr. comes up in the news in this and has a big crash, and Bill Hybels and Ravi Zacharias and pedophile priests and this really hurts Christianity, and Christians run for cover, and then Christians we need more rules, and we need safer churches, and we need stronger laws and stronger walls. Let's police high-status men more carefully, especially in the church, because they are the examples of why our conservative ethos is superior. Now remember, these things are working in the same economy. It says that same-sex attracted individuals should not seek what's natural to them. And when high-status Christian men fail to keep to the script, someone comes along and says, see, it doesn't even work for those who are most successful at promoting it. It must be denounced and abandoned. Not everyone will jump on the anti-religious skeptic bandwagon, though. Many see the tremendous sunk costs in Christianity. Post-Christian. She doesn't want to not be a Christian anymore. She just doesn't want to be associated with Trump voters. That's the bottom line. And Christianity is the tether. She has a vision for Christianity, and she wants the other half of the population to disappear. It's Jordan Peterson, one of the best comments he made in public on the Bill Maher show. What are you going to do with the other half of the country? Certainly the goods of monogamy can be seen as beneficial over promiscuity and chaos. Let's use Christianity's tools to influence, to tame gay men, and to elevate the social status of lesbian women. Let's use all that God talk to undo what God talk did 1,500 years ago. The already receding threat of divine punishment can be done away with God via the church affirming same-sex marriage. The acceptance tent can be expanded so that all the riches of the church can be available to all. Win-win. High-status politicians not too long ago in the Democratic primaries played the "how does their gay marriage threaten your hetero marriage" card quite publicly. And on one level, they seem to have a point. If I'm attracted to the opposite sex, I have the freedom to marry a woman. Who am I to tell them they can't marry someone of the same sex and have it celebrated and validated by the same powerful religious social structure that I enjoy? This is clearly inequitable. However, does this really not tinker with the powerful forces that have been marshaled along the battlefronts with larger populations than those who are significantly and durably same-sex attracted? There's always this thing about, and again, Jonathan Peugeot is really good with this. Fringes are fringes for a reason, and in a sort of a stable system, you have fringe and center, and there are equitable arrangements sort of made along the way. But when fringe becomes center, things get a little crazy. What if everyone decides monogamy is a bad idea? You know who usually loses out? All the people without the privilege. It's the people without coin in the dating market. And again, one of the common things that we talk about in our local Jordan Peterson meetup is, well, the issues of 20 and 30-something men and women and the struggle they're finding to find marriage partners. There was a whole lot of culture and social pressure, even in the 80s when I was young, and definitely when my parents were young, to sort of follow these scripts. And many people didn't do well, but there were sort of ways to get around that. And actually, many people in my church, their first child was born less than 9 months before they came about, or they lived with their boyfriend or girlfriend and now are their spouse. Others who have had episodes or durable same-sex attraction, etc., etc. This stuff is common. And as a pastor, you hear about it. It's not unusual. It hasn't been, at least as long as I've been pastoring. There's no question that the very, very old economy of sexual pursuit has been deeply blunted by those same powerful Christian forces, trying to resist what we have come to expect from high-status men. Why should God deny liberation from the natural, authentic desires of some but not others? That too is inequitable. Equity always must have a limited purview to do its demanding work. Think about that. The article I began with suggests that the solution to the frustration of the blunted natural biological imperative of the high-status Christian man is the opposite of the Billy Graham rule or the Mike Pence rule. Billy Graham and Mike Pence basically blunt forced the problem in order to not lose the game. It's an inelegant and perhaps unfair solution, but is reasonably effective in achieving its goal. Many low-status yet locally high-status Christian men, such as local pastors, have been using basic tricks and hacks like this for years. Talk to pastors. I won't ride in a car with a woman. I won't go out to coffee alone with a woman. I won't meet with a woman in my office. Safe church and office, well, have windows in your offices and have two unrelated people in the nursery and all these tricks and hacks in order to keep children safe. And all this is good stuff. I mean, I'm not arguing against it, but it's tricks and hacks. And these things generally do work. Be careful which tricks and hacks you denounce to which people, because some people are avoiding a cascade of misery by simple little tricks and hacks that keep them away from things they know they're susceptible to. Safe Church promotes such tricks and hacks all over the place. Install windows, have more than one person there. These aren't necessarily that different from what seasoned alcoholics do to keep from getting into situations of temptation and fall. The challenge to the article are guys like Bill Hybels. Hybels, like other high-status Christian leaders, struggled and in some ways failed. He was affirming women in ministry and saw to it that women played a prominent role in the operations of Willow Creek. And Bill Hybels championed this at a day when, well, a lot of it had changed, but he still lost status with some churches for making this call in the evangelical marketplace, okay? I'm often amazed that people fail to give Donald Trump credit for just how many women he elevates to promotions of leadership in his organizations, first chief of the CIA. Now putting another woman up for the Supreme Court. Even before becoming POTUS, you can see it on The Apprentice. Now, it's true that he seems to like to name good-looking women, but they are still women, and women have their own interesting relationship with attractiveness, as you can see in any grocery store checkout line. Contrary to the old bias, high-status men contrary to the old bias, should put a comma in there. High-status men are not necessarily intimidated by powerful women. Their power might, in fact, make them more attractive to some men. I'm sure it does. Sexual attractiveness is only one kind of power that women use to attract potential reproductive partners and to compete against other women who may be rivals for exclusive access to men's resources. In some ways, perhaps, the article I noted plays along with other male status games, which is men allying with women's cause in order to gain status among women in order to, you know what. Now, some will read this and say, women are not so crass and simple as to be involved in this sort of sexual economy. Okay, if you want to believe that fairy tale. Men the same way. I mean, it's all of us here. Yeah, but I think that's yet another part of the economy. Just as it's going to be harder to deny high-status Christian men the object of their natural and authentic desires, as you undermine the power of the Christian system to generally demand resistance to such desires, so it also will be increasingly difficult to deny the reality of two-level theories. And this is where I nod to a Daniel Bonavac video I made a little clip of, where there's all sorts of two-level theories that are operating in the 20th century and the 21st century that say things like, well, what you think is going on in your conscious self is not really going on beneath the surface. And that, of course, gives someone like Brett Weinstein lots of things to talk about as an evolutionary biologist, or Jordan Peterson as a psychologist. Two-level theories are also deeply promoted today. All white people are natural-born white supremacists, whether they know it or not. And they need to perpetually own their privilege and daily confess and war against it. All cisgender men are natural-born misogynists and must confess their patriarchy every day and war against it. Now, if you're not a white man, you may feel safe, but someone with a greater oppression Olympic status is going to come after you with a two-level theory and demand that privilege be owned, confessions be ritualized, and reparations be paid. I think we know that by now. To be clear, I'm not skeptical about the validity of two-level theories. I think they are real, and many of their observations are valid. My skepticism comes when they are isolated and weaponized. Discovering one two-level theory is easy and convenient, but recognizing just how many of them there are and how dynamic that economy is beneath the surface of all of us is what I wish we would realize. Christianity, of course, has its own hierarchy of values. Mortify some desires so that other goods and desires, I'm going to make that goods instead of desires, it's a better word, can come to the fore. Make some trade-offs so that other greater gains can be had. Monogamy. Now you might say, these economies don't intermingle. Oh, Padawan, really? They do. Maybe when you're a little older, you'll see it, and you'll see it in yourself, and you'll see the ways they failed, and I hope you have such wisdom. But I'd say that they do, and we really don't know how changes in one area impact changes in others, which is why, sort of in Protestant ecclesiology, you see this vast experiment going on. And so lower the anger a little bit. Be a little bit more curious. Be a little more interesting. Follow the affirming churches. Follow the churches that aren't going to affirm. Watch the dynamics. There'll be lots of second-level theories at play, lots of postulation about what's really going on. But almost every time when we say what's really going on, we're saying this exclusively, and we should be thinking, well, maybe that's a little higher on the hierarchy than we thought before. It's probably a smarter way to approach it. You might say that these economies don't intermingle, but I say they do, and that we really don't know how changes in one area impact changes in another. I am skeptical that you can selectively dismantle aspects of a moral economy without consequences in other areas. We always, as always, we ask, who pays? Who benefits? We are all participating in this live-action experiment. That is what history does. My point is that you can't expect to marshal forces against high-status males if you keep undermining the significant achievements that have curtailed them for centuries. You're taking down the walls. Those walls are being used against Bill Hybels, Ravi Zacharias. Now, Jerry Seinfeld, no walls there. Out of church, no walls there. We're trying to figure out community standards here. We're trying to figure out what works well for a community long term. We're trying to assess what's really going on. You say your sexual freedom is what's important, and then say don't pursue what you are able to by virtue of wealth and biology. Really? Really? This isn't going to work. So there's my blog post. Edited, updated. I hope I remember to put all the links below. How long has this gone on? I don't know. Maybe an hour? We'll see. Let me know what you think in the comment section.